Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another E7 video. Today I have Tristan Wolf. Tristan, as you know, is a more beginner friendly or like a more guide PvE oriented content creator. And today we're going to do a little tier list and just kind of describe our thoughts about the new characters that you can pull from the Moonlight connections. Where they are in the tier list is not as important as whether or not you should be pulling them or what the strengths and weaknesses of each character is.
I think the tier list should be prefaced with who you should pick, assuming you don't have any of these units.
Yes.
You move down the tier list. If you don't have the S tier unit, you go to the A tier unit. If you don't have the A tier, etc., and so on. Because the reality is, if you have all these units but Astromancer Elena, you probably get Astromancer Elena.
Like, we can get into it. How about we start with Commander Pavel? Where do you think Commander Pavel falls on this tier list?
Commander Pavel is really, really good in Arena and for farming unrecorded history at a super fast pace. I think his usefulness in RTA is ebbed quite a bit. I haven't seen him picked very often, if at all, in the past several months. He's kind of fallen off the map there. So I think he is really good for a relatively new player, but a more advanced player is not going to find a lot of use for him outside of Arena, maybe Guild Wars, or, you know, speeding up some of their farming runs in unrecorded history. Maybe that'll change as new units come out. He used to be a really great pickup, almost a must ban in certain comps. I'd seed him like probably B tier.
You know, speaking as a cleaver, like, which is going to be, you know, where a lot of my bias is going to come from. I thought that, and I still think that Pavel is like one of the highest damage dealing AoE characters in the game, competitive with characters like Architect Leica and Strays, even though he is definitely way worse now and arguably outright unpickable in RTA, unless if you were like majorly draft gapping someone. I think ML Cavill, I don't want to say got power crept because I don't even remember which character came out first, but the character that we're going to talk about after Cavill is basically who, if you wanted to pick Cavill, you would just pick the other character instead. And the character I'm alluding to is Astromancer Elena. I think I agree with you, Tristan. I'd probably tentatively put Cavill also in the B tier. He's pretty much an exclusively like cleave focused character only, and most of the time, even at that, it's not really worth it to pick him because you need so many other characters to set him up as well, unless if you're in like PvE content or an arena.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction to make that this is a tier list not on how good the units are in the meta, but how good they are in relation to each other, because we're trying to encourage you to pick it. Just because a unit is sitting in the C or D tier doesn't mean it's a bad unit. It just means it's nowhere near as good as the other 6 units. I totally agree. Like, I agree. So if we move to Astromancer Elena, I think Astromancer Elena shares a lot of the same qualities that you mentioned with Cavill, not quite in the same way of like, you know, her doing the exact same amount of damage, but in terms of what you bring these characters into, you know, there's like the big beefy tanks, or like, you know, there's maybe a counter character that you don't have to deal with. So then, like, you know, you have the Sylvan, or like you have the Astromancer Elena, pretty much stops any real tank down from occurring. A lot of times, even when it comes to like current arena or guild war, she is extremely popular, extremely effective in stopping stuff like shoe defenses or teams that have counterers like Bellion and stuff like that. And even though you do ideally want to make use of Flan's Unseen Observer on her to get more souls, she pretty much always works so long as you have an opener like Ran or Peyra, just an opener that does AoE. I think I would probably put Astromancer Elena in S. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, so like you can give them here, but I'm going to place her tentatively here in the S tier. See, that's ironic because I seed her solidly in the D tier. Because though her kit is really, really unique, so is her usage. She is probably the most niche unit on this tier list. All the other units are pickable in varieties of locations. They can be run several different ways. They can be run in several different comps. They have use in and out of PvP and RTA, but Astromancer, you reach for the unit when you need to stop counterattacks, and that's it. And a lot of the units that are using counterattacks, stopping them isn't that big of a deal if the enemy has any kind of tempo on their team, and when it is a big deal, she's just a must ban, which is nice, but still, you're only reaching for certain unique situations, and I don't see that with pretty much any of the other units except maybe one of the other units. So I don't know, that's my opinion. It's not that she's a bad unit, and you're right. In Guild Wars, you can slam her and win some certain fights if you have to do that fight, and there are probably other ways to do that fight. So I don't know. I just don't have the appreciation for her versatility like you do in a tier list with a pool this strong and this small.
That is fair. I should probably have explained as well. I definitely agree, and I think we could definitely come to like a middle ground. Something that I also forgot to mention that I usually do mention about like especially Astromancer Elena. If you compare like the build or like the gear quality that you need for Astromancer Elena and a lot of the other characters in this tier list, you'll notice that her, like, if you're talking about how little you need to invest to make her work, I think she's probably right next to Pavel in terms of how easy it is to build them. That being said, I do admit that, like, in terms of like how like this tier list is judged, you know, obviously characters like Cannaaaa, Lilias probably have like an insane amount of like versatility. Lilias is a bit more difficult because, like, you know, she's great and she's like one of the most overwhelming characters that EpicSeven has ever released, but her gear is also a bit more difficult to play out or like to farm for. I'm okay with putting her ahead of Pavel. I think to put her below Pavel, in my opinion, is a little tough because while I would probably never ever pick Astromancer Elena in RTA, I think just blow for blow, you would never, I think, reach for Elena, or you would never reach for Pavel nearly as much as you would reach for Astromancer Elena. But if you're okay with that, we can move on to Mediator. But what are your thoughts on Astro's placement?
I think she's a D tier unit. I think there's no world where I would pick her over any of the other options on this list except possibly DDR, because he's takes a lot of unique setup and other units to facilitate him. But it's your tier list, and I got your back on it. You roll with whatever you want to roll. I'm just saying that I think a new player is going to pick her, and he's like, I got my banging new 5-star. I selected this 5-star. Now let's go use it. Okay. Well, I'll keep refreshing Arena until I find a counter comp that won't kill me some other way. I can win this one Guild War fight out of the several others I could have picked to choose from. Well, I'll just jump into RTA. Maybe people are going to use Senya. They're going to use Landy. They're going to use all these counterattack comps, and she's banned. Okay. Maybe I should have picked another unit.
Do you feel
that's just what I see happening. I've got her, I think, double S, and she's really well built, and I've used her twice this year, and both times we're in Guild Wars. So maybe that's a me problem. I don't know. You play different than I play. You see things differently than I do. So I if you see her higher up, I trust, and it's your tier list. So you go with where your heart says to go. But for me, I just don't see picking her over the other units.
You're pushing me into the corner here. Hold up. I mean, I will say again, I guess it depends on how much you value, like, because again, I have not picked Astromancer in RTA a single time this entire year. Maybe it's different for me because right now I'm focusing a lot on Arena and Guild War. And like for Arena and Guild War, I use her at least once or twice every Guild War. That's just someone that has speed, of course, right? If I look right now, I'm pretty sure if I just scroll to my arena, every single one of these teams, you have to use Astromancer Elena.
I just cleave them, literally just BBK cleave them, but okay.
mainly
but you're right that she is a good answer to that too.
Guys, this is what I meant. This is like what I see. It just gets going, but yeah, okay. Like if I think I'm okay with leaving it in B. Like I'll take the fall if we need it.
I will say this: if you're going to put her where she's at, you might as well get rid of the D row, because who we got that's lower than this column. But let's keep propagating. We can adjust rows later.
Now we have one that's probably a little easier to get around. And what do you feel about Mediator?
I think he's S tier. He always has been. He always will be. He does literally everything in this game. He cleanses. He immunities. He attack buffs. He CR pushes units. He strips. He attack downs. I mean, you can even build him for damage. The guy does everything. He can be run fast. He can be run slow. He can be run in aggro and standard and tank down. Yeah, there is probably the most versatile unit in the game, and that's why you always see him picked in the first 3 picks in RTA, almost always. Yeah, he's even great in some PvE. In Ancient Inheritance, he's a freaking god.
Yeah, I mean, I think the harder question for me would be to decide if Lilias or Hand Guy is better. Like, you know, obviously there's like the gear arguments, but there are some people that have like DM'd me asking, hey, if I have like decent speed and I don't have both of these characters, who do I pick? And I actually don't know what the answer to that is. More recently, I would say that, you know, Lilias is always, you know, has been strong, but Summer Luluka's kind of popped up, and like it's a bit more annoying to pick like Conqueror Lilias into Summer Luluka. But again, like Lilias, great for Hall of Trials, great for Guild War, great for Arena, great for everything, great for Yorm. It's kind of a tough thing for me to not put Mediator as probably the best, just because on average people don't have the gear for Conqueror Lilias. But there have been times where, you know, everyone's situation is unique, and they'll say like, oh well, Mediator does the healing, or like Mediator has like the shielding, the stripping, the spell, the cleansing, the attack buff, and that's terrific. But like, can you really tell someone that has the speed for a Conqueror Lilias not to pull for Conqueror Lilias? And that's where I struggle, but that's like, you know, that's for Conqueror Lilias. For Mediator Kawerik, you said it, like, he can be built as effectiveness, he can be built for ER, he can be built for damage, you can build him as like a stone wall, you know, like 30,000 HP, like 1600 defense, which is what I used to have. Even aside from like the PvE content that you're referring to, like specifically with Ancient Inheritance, I don't think I go a single guild war without also using Mediator Kawerik. I already use Astromancer Elena. What it usually is that one team is my Astromancer Ran team, and my other team is my Mediator Kawerik, like LCB, or, you know, like my whatever, my Stene team, which is usually why, you know, originally why I put Astromancer so high. But I definitely use like Mediator no matter what, every single guild war, no questions asked. And so yeah, I mean, I think we both agree that he's in the S tier. He's arguably the best. But what do we think about Death Dealer Ray?
I put him in the C tier only because he needs other high-end units to work in concert with him. So if you just if he's your first ML5 star, you're not going to really use him likely. He's a little tricky to play. He's an injury unit, so he only has play in RTA. His stock went up with the introduction of just more HP scaling units. He's a fun unit. He is a lot of fun to play, and he can be devastating when people try to tank down against you. Mm-hmm. You just don't see tank down as much as you used to anymore.
I think that for the purpose of like this tier list, and for people that are probably looking for this tier list, it's really hard to recommend Death Dealer Ray until you essentially have everyone else. And this is why, like, for me, I have Astromancer at B. You know, if I could like shuffle things around, I'd actually put Pavel probably in C, and I would put Death Dealer Ray in D. But like for me,
I think they could both be in the same tier. I think they could easily both be in the same tier. The only edge I've got for Pavel, he's got extreme PvE usage, both in arena and in unrecorded history.
My main argument for Pavel and Astromancer as opposed to Death Dealer Ray, okay, not saying that getting speed is easy, but finding a, like, let's say even like a 250 opener is probably still easier than finding, like, number one, like an ML5. Right, because like most of the time when you have Death Dealer Ray, right, you're pairing it with Solitaria, or you're pairing it with like Archdemon, or, you know, like some other debuffer. And like sometimes, you know, you're trying to use it against injury characters, and like, in all honesty, right, not every game is a Death Dealer Ray game. Like it takes a lot to make it a Death Dealer Ray game, because you need to have specifically someone that's picking like Alencia, Apoc, Shu, or like, you know, whatever characters, you know, that are trying to like out tank you. And I just think that on average, what people probably see is like, you'll see Apoc, and so like, you know, that there's some value there. But I feel like on average, people are probably seeing Stene. You're like maybe seeing like Briar, which like Briar is very popular. I'd argue maybe you still see like Aiden and stuff like that. So for me, like Death Dealer Ray, I agree with like your first and foremost point, which is that if you get Death Dealer Ray and he's by himself, you're like, okay, that's fucking terrific, but I'm not going to use the character. And you could say that the same for, you know, for Astromancer and Pavel in a sense. However, I think that the character that you would need to pair with Pavel and Astromancer Elena could be way, way worse, or like could be like way easier, or way easily, or more easily
built, accessible, more gearable.
Yeah, as opposed to like, oh, well, now you have to get Solitaria, or like you have to get Archdemon, or you have to get like, you know, Araminta or some other like debuffer, Pirate Flan, right, and pair it with DDR. Like I just listed off like four debuffers, you know what I mean? Pavel is like, oh, okay, you have, you know, I don't know, like some fucking 4-star or like some AoE, and it kind of works. But like I digress. If you want to leave him in C, I definitely see, like I agree with your argument. I think like Pavel and Death Dealer Ray can definitely be in the same point. It's just that,
and people that love Ray are gonna be upset about it, and he does win fights when he's picked properly and drafted properly. He is horrible to fight against. But he is even more niche than Elena.
I'm fully on board with you. Again, we can move the exact points around. But what do you think about the Jesse to our James, Miss Conqueror Lilias? Where would you put Miss Conqueror Lilias?
Okay, go with me on this one, right? You put her in the D tier.
Okay, all right. I'm listening. Okay.
Just put her in the D tier. Go ahead and move her up right there. Now you go over to where it says D, you click on that, and you change it to SS, and you drag that tier right above Mediator Kawerik.
Oh, that's so weird, Tristan. It would appear as though our tier list looks funny now. So what exactly happened to Conqueror Lilias? So what do you think about Conqueror Lilias?
Anybody see Conqueror Lilias not banned and not picked in the first 2 picks of RTA? Anybody?
Me, actually.
Because she's that good. She's loaded with tempo. She is great in and out of RTA. She's usable in Hall of Trials. She's usable in Guild Wars, on defense, on offense. She's usable in Ancient Inheritance. She's a farmer. She is so good she can be built in multiple ways. I think if it's not a unit I've built more than one of, it doesn't belong in A tier or above.
Do you have 2 Conqueror Liliases?
Yeah, and 2 hand guys and 2 Riolets, yeah.
Okay.
You build a super tanky, a giga tanky slower Conqueror Lilias and put it on your Guild War defense and laugh and laugh and laugh at all your green shields.
Oh my god.
So yeah, she's just a really good unit, and I know there's more counters to her than there are for hand guy, but she is so good for tempo, and a lot of those counters only seem to attack one aspect of her kit. This counter, you can't use her S1. This counter, you can't do multiple attacks. You can't S3 into the S2. This counter, you can't use non-attack skills, etc. So if you truly want to counter her, you practically need 2 different counter units. So they've got to pick 2 units to deal with your one, and that's a huge net positive. And that's why she's still picked. So I just, as good as hand guy is, I think her usefulness outside of RTA, as well as her first pick ability and just how devastating she is if you leave her in, and the variety of ways you can build her. If you want to put her in the same tier with hand guy, I approve, but at least put her to the left of him, because I think if you don't have this unit, you get this unit. There's no other unit on this list if you don't have this unit.
Okay, all right. A lot of what you said is true about Conqueror Lilias. Again, I don't know how much we want to cater to the gearing of these characters, because like a very common complaint, I would say almost like the most common complaint about Conqueror Lilias is, aside from how strong she is how difficult it is to build her. Ultimately, if you have 310 or like if you start gear gapping people with Conqueror Lilias, she's one of those characters that when people say like cash game or like whale or like when you think of whales in the game, like, some of these characters, I'll be honest with you, you could spend like $20,000 or like $500 on Remnant Violet. You could spend probably $1 on Riolet, and like the outcome is still the same, like you're not really getting more than like disappointment when Riolet gets hit, But like if you spent $20,000 on a Conqueror Lilias, that thing is probably taking turn 1 against, everyone else's speed units. And that's, not to put too much value on that, but Conqueror Lilias is a character that's very gear focused. And even as you say, she's so good that if you have like specific builds for her, like even on Guild War, you're landing wins, right? And it doesn't just have to be like a speed conversation. It's like, well, actually, if you have like ER on your Conqueror Lilias, or if you have like, happened to me recently, like Jinte's Conqueror Lilias provoked my like 250 or like 260 ER Summer Luluka. Like Summer Luluka was designed to counter Conqueror Lilias, and my Summer Luluka got provoked, which makes no sense. And like, wow, like that's pretty well. That's like a feature that you can pretty much only have on characters like Conqueror Lilias, and obviously like stuff like Zeo. Like that's very crazy, especially for how much she does. If we're just going based off of like how usable or how incredible they are, not really considering gear, I definitely put her at minimum as rank 1. However, for me, like I see it like daily in stream. People are saying I have these choices, and this will become way more prevalent, by the way, when we get to the next characters, which is like Riolet and Sylvan Sage. But like gearing is not really something you can ignore. Do you know what I mean? Like at some point we're going to have like this conversation of like, is gearing important, and like does imprints matter? Or do imprints matter rather? Because the 2 remaining characters in Undecided do kind of go up and down in viability and quality because of imprints, and fucking thank you Obvious, or thank you Captain Obvious for saying that. But like it is much more apparent than any other character on the tier list. But again, I'm okay with putting her at top tier.
Allow me to counter your one big counter Lilias counter is or Conqueror Lilias counter. Gearing's not an issue. Not right now. Not really. Not if you think about it. You're playing an Emperor or really high champs, yeah. You need some giga good gear to make that Conqueror Lilias viable. But the meta's slowed down a lot. It's slowed down because of a lot of standard units. Cleave is in a rough place. You can still cleave, but not like you used to, right? And the people who are pushing for Emperor, usually 290 to 310 speeds on Liliases. If you're pushing for Emperor, that's not a tall order for you, most likely. For the people who are just trying to get to champions, I've seen 260, 270 Conqueror Lilias's work. Now, you're not going to race with it, but how many fights have you gone into where you've really worried about racing? If you pick Conqueror Lilias and they try to race you, then you start smashing down some standard teams and you have her support that standard team, and you run her slower as a support unit and you let them go first and then you go last.
Okay,
so I think gearing is important, and there's a lot of units on here that aren't real units without the gear. But I think there was a time where if you didn't have a 300 Conqueror Lilias, you just didn't draft her. At 290, maybe. If you were lower than 290, she was a PvE unit. And I don't think that's where we are right now in the meta. The units have slowed down. Even with inductions of units like Zeo has actually slowed the meta down, because you can't outrace that guy.
Yeah.
So the meta's slowed down and the fights have sped up. So being aggressive with standard and controlling tempo in the fight is really important to winning. And that's the kind of unit she is. And that's part of why she's so good in this. So I'm almost, not quite, but almost on the line that Handguy can be a harder unit to gear than Conqueror Lilias anymore.
All right. I think this is the last thing that I'll quantify, or like I think it'll give some better insight. What do you think the average EpicSeven player, or what speed do you think the average EpicSeven player can make, or like what's the average speed of a Conqueror Lilias? Do you think that like the average
speed of a Conqueror Lilias?
Yeah,
280 to 300, 280 to 300 range. So I'd say probably 285 would be a solid average. 280.
Okay, and you think the average EpicSeven player can make that? Correct? Like that's your assumption.
The average EpicSeven player that's pushing for champs probably can make that, yes. The
Okay.
average EpicSeven player that's pushing for masters can get away with 260.
All right, I think it's just something that like I think it's like a point of reference, because for me, like I haven't specifically like looked at masters or like, you know, gold and like challenger gear recently. Like I know that there are definitely champ players that, you know, can rock anywhere between 270 280, but like if you start having like 230 220 Conqueror Liliases, I'm pretty sure with just a speed boot, you're already like 230, right? Something like that on Conqueror Lilias, like even if you have 0 speed gear. But yeah, I just wanted to, it was just for context, just like a bit of context on my end. But we don't have to, we already know she's the best of the best. You know where to use her. You can use her in literally any content in the game. But what do you feel about, how do you feel about, don't call him God, don't call it a comeback. What do you think about, what do you think about this Dark Thief?
I tell you what, I'm a bad player. I was hard stuck in Masters, but then this glimmer of hope arrived in my life, and that glimmer of hope was Riolet. He became my savior, my bread, my light. He is the way. I pray to Riolet every morning, afternoon, and evening. I pray to Riolet when I boot up EpicSeven and start my endless Wyvern 7 runs. I pray to Riolet to save me and boost me to Legend tier, because with Riolet I am strong, with Riolet I'm fulfilled, with Riolet I am saved. Praise be to Riolet. If you do not have faith, this is not the unit for you. This is a faith-driven unit. People that pick Riolet and they just get hit right through that evasion, they've had a crisis of faith. If you are not a man or a woman of faith, this is not the unit for you. So, because I am a man of faith, and because Riolet slid me from from masters into champs in just 2 days, I'm putting Riolet in A tier. Now, the one caveat to Riolet is, unlike most of the other units on this list, he takes the gear. He takes probably the highest gear threshold of any unit on this list. There's nothing sadder than a Riolet that dodges everything, and you launch that S3, and the HP bar doesn't drop. Yeah, he is an imprint hungry unit. He is a gear hungry unit. If you don't, Sharfade's right. If you are not in the 430 or above gear score, just put him in the waiting room. He is A tier for a advanced player, a champions player, somebody who's got several hundred pieces of gear, who's coming along in the game and wanting to take their RTA experience to the next level. He solves a lot of problems. But for the starter player, for the player who doesn't have a lot of gear, that maybe this is their first ML unit, he's down there with DDR, simply because he's not going to be usable for several months until you get the gear to make him work. But he can be lifesteal, he can even be speed. He can be the guy that saves your RTA fights.
Rifiru does bring up a good point. Like the current AI gear is actually pretty perfect for Remnant Riolet.
Indeed it is. Mine got a giga-huge boost from that. 26 crit chance boots all over it.
Oh my god. Anyways, RNG Lux hacking aside, do you think that the imprint in the gearing knocks him down at all? Like, I know you were.
I think that's why he's an A and not S. But if you want to knock him down below that, you go for it. But that's he is a unit that makes you not angry at RTA, because he either wins. No, think about it, right? He either wins the fight for you, or you had a crisis of faith and need to believe more in your Riolet, because
Okay, all right.
how can you be mad about RNG loss, right? It's either hell yeah, my Riolet destroyed him, good pick, never lose, or his faith was stronger than my faith today. I need to address that. Can't be mad about an RNG loss, right? You'd be mad because you mispicked. You'd be mad because you misplayed. You'd be mad because you misclicked. You don't be mad because somebody 3%ed you. How can you control if somebody hits through your evasion? So Riolet's actually made me not be mad about RTA, so I like him for that too. But he has almost no use outside of RTA. I'll give you that. And
Hey, he was pretty good for the
that's
side
his two
story.
biggest detractors. His two biggest detractors are gearing, and he's an RTA unit only.
He was pretty good for the summer side story. I'll tell you what. That was great. He was a fast nuker on S3. I soloed, if you don't remember, like I soloed both advents. One was with Summer Luluka and Violet, and the other was Summer Luluka with Remnant Violet. Hey, that was some good stuff. I mean, okay, let me level for the non-believers for a sec, shall we? Now, let's be clear. Remnant Violet is a terrific DPS. Arguably minus, like, you know, or arguably, especially if you don't allow characters like Lua or Conqueror Lilias or AOL to exist, or if you take or you push them away or whatever. Realistically, Remnant Violet is actually one of the more solid DPSs that you could he's one of the more solid DPSs that you could pick. Now, obviously, there's stuff like Karina, and there's stuff like, I don't know, Briar that you have to deal with. However, in like a standard game with like Remnant Violet and stuff like that, if you find yourself in a position where you need to have like a hyper carry or like a solo DPS that gets all the healing, all the shielding, all the mitigation, all the buffing, and he can do it all, he's your man most of the time. There is an argument to be made that now Landy's your girl, because they essentially do the same thing, and same thing with Lionheart Surmia. But arguably right now, since there's so much strip in the game, like there's Bihu, I'm gonna say it, Bihu's pretty good, by the way. Bihu, Lua, Conqueror Lilias, AOL, Solitaria. It is a little more difficult to pick him, and that's not to say you're supposed to pick him on 3 or 2 or anything like that. Or even in RTA. You
definitely don't first pick him.
Yeah, you definitely don't first pick him, and you definitely aren't, you know, going into Guild War against like these characters with the assumption to kill. But at the end of the day, like there is a bit of like a bar that's set for characters in PvP, and he kind of sets it, because the unfortunate or like the actual reality of EpicSeven and RTA matches, that even if you're drafting kind of poorly, you do have to be able to either survive or prevent Conqueror Lilias and Riolet from one-shotting one of your units. Because the honest to God truth is that Vigor with the tack buff on Riolet one-shots anything in the game. Pretty much, I don't think I've experienced anything like survive that one thing. If there's mitigation, you just one-shot the mitigation. If it's the damage dealer or like a squishy or like a bruiser, they also usually die to Riolet plus Vigor buff. But I digress. Personally, I think that because there's so much debuffing in the game, I would want to put him in B. But for like the sake of our tier list, it looks a bit weird if our tier list doesn't have a bit more, for like the bell curve that we're talking about. It would kind of only make more sense if we had like some characters in A and C. So I think in that sense, I would probably put Riolet, or I'm okay with putting Riolet in A, but like I already know in this conversation everyone's gonna say, but my Riolet doesn't dodge, but my Riolet doesn't do this, I hate Riolet, like Riolet sucks this, Riolet sucks that. But
I could address chat for a second, Canna.
Okay, what's up?
To the new people asking these questions, welcome to EpicSeven. RIP your free time. Destina's not on the list because we're just talking about the new Moonlight blessing that's coming out, where you'll be able to select and build towards getting for free, with a little bit of elbow grease, one of these 7 ML5 units. So these are the only units we're discussing, and we're rating them in relation to each other, not in relation to how good they are compared to everything in the game, just to each other. I believe the ML selector is going to start at the end of the month with the anniversary, but you'd have to check the release from EpicSeven. And we discussed gearing, Conqueror Lilias, and Mediator Kawerik. All these units are almost all these units are top end units. So most of the people you're going to watch on Twitch have insane levels of gear on them, because they're min-maxing everything they can out of these units. With the exception of Riolet, I think, and possibly Cavill, all of these units work in their function with a lower quality of gear. If you can build a 300 Sea Lilias, amazing, you're ready to hit Emperor. If you can only build a 260 Sea Lilias, build 260. She'll boost your PvE capabilities, and you'll have some luck in the lower RTA and in Arena. So don't fret too much about there being a minimum gear threshold, with the exception of Riolet, especially Riolet. If you don't have the right gear for Riolet, he's not a real unit.
You say for Riolet, but I would actually argue that Sylvan Sage is in a very similar position to Riolet, which is what I thought was going to be the more interesting conversation for us to have, because personally,
she's a tricky one.
Okay, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first for your take on it?
I think she's one of the most overlooked and underrated units of the game, so you go ahead and talk about her, because I've flip-flopped back and forth on her, and I honestly have no idea where to put her.
Okay, so
I could probably talk myself into it, but yeah.
Okay, so for me, here's, no influence, like just my own thoughts. Like when I think of Sylvan Sage, I think of a character that gets punched by Cannaaaa and, loses all of her focus by Solitaria and gets stunned by Arrowwall literally every game. Now, obviously, I don't play like the perfect standard. I don't play standard even like decently well, I would say. That being said, like I can tell like when sometimes like Sylvan Sage works. However, kind of similar to Riolet, where it has to be such a special position, or there has to be such a specific arrangement of pre-bans that they would work, or like, you have to have like a specific amount of gear score for her to work, or for Riolet to work. I feel like Sylvan Sage is the same, except anytime that I would want her to work, I would rather her have ER, which is really unfortunate because, again, like getting ER on a character who has crit chance imprint pretty much means that you need to have max crit, or like, have max imprints on her in order to really use her. And that's true for Riolet, although, he has evasion, whereas Sylvan Sage has nothing. She has like her passive. And while both characters get disabled by Solitaria and both characters kind of die to Cannaaaa, it feels a little bit bad because of, at least with Riolet, you can cope a little bit and say like, well, I dodged that like, 100% of the time. Sylvan Sage is pretty much always the same outcome. It's like, oh, I died. Oh, I died. Oh, I died. Oh, I died. Now, however, and now I say that, I still don't think she's the worst character on the list. I think Sylvan Sage is more usable, in my opinion, even as a standalone than Ray. I would probably either put her right next to Pavel or just ahead of Death Dealer Ray. And the reason why I put her there is because there are not many PvE uses for her, as far as I can tell. Pretty much anytime you'd want to use Sylvan in Arena or in PvE, or in Guild War, you'd probably just use Stene. I don't know of any hunts that could really use her, or I mean, I guess technically you can if you want like the C damage, but that's like kind of, that's kind of cope. You'd rather probably use Ilanov or something. And so then the real question then is, how good is Sylvan Sage in something like RTA? And for me, if you can't pick a character on 3 and she's a 5th pick, most of the time it's going to get banned. And I feel like more often than not, you would see someone probably ban the Pirate Captain on 5, Remnant Riolet on 5, the Briar on 5, the Architect Leica on 5, the Strays, the Archdemon, etc. Those are, I think, unanimously always going to get banned. But in my mind, if I see someone pick Sylvan Sage on 5, I fucking run it. I probably drafted like an idiot anyways. I'm banning mitigation. I'm going and I'm praying that I kill the Sylvan Sage. That's me. How do you feel about it, Tristan?
Yeah, I mean, you do have a valid point with gear, right? Here's my Sylvan Sage, and I'm pretty advanced in gear, and I think she's barely functional built like that. She does a lot of damage. She could use about maybe 2k more health to really push her up to that next level, but I mean, her gear score is already pretty heckin' high. It's well over 400 gear score, and I still don't reach for her very often. Riolet is so much easier to slot in than her because, like you said, she just gets stunned. If you're going to build her with ER, you're going to have a Sylvia in that. Now, I don't think she needs Chatty. I think she needs Black Hand to do enough damage to be worthwhile. You can put Chatty on her, but the days of Bruiser fighting, she just gets stunned, controlled, and killed, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of Chatty on her. Chatty's good for Roy, great for Roy Tech if you want to play those kind of games.
Roy's artifact. If I had a max Roy's, like the glove,
she can work on Roy's
Sylvan Sage into Aiden, and it's like, nope, I have the hit chance already. Like, you can't say that. No, 50-50. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, ignition papers, Black Hand, or of course, the Every Mage artifact tags book. But anyway, like you said, she's very controllable because you can't put any significant ER on her and have it really matter. Or if you do, you got what, like a 500 gear score unit to make her viable. So tough to build and even tougher to use. Now, I mean, if you shoehorn her into the right spot, good God, there's nothing more terrifying than ML Landy rocking a crit damage buff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough. I've soloed some fights with her. She's been the last unit alive, but you've got to be real careful about her placement. So which makes her just as niche as Astromancer, just as niche as Cavill, and with no use outside of RTA, which both Cavill and Astromancer have. I reluctantly put her down there at C as well.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
yeah, beside Death Dealer Ray as well. I just can't in good conscience put her on the same level as those two when her only use is RTA and it's not as strong of a use as I'd like to see. Whereas these units have incredibly powerhouse uses outside of RTA and still some niche uses in. She only has niche uses in and no uses out.
The
And
other
it kills
thing,
me because I love that unit. And when she works, it's glorious. But the level of gear she takes is on par with the level gear Riolet takes, and Riolet is much easier to just slot into fights and win.
the other thing that I was gonna say, like as a quick aside, this is just an example, and obviously you can find like different like scenarios to pick Sylvan Sage, but personally I felt like one of the most common team compositions that you would pick Sylvan Sage into is something like Stene APOC, because you can't kill Sylvan with the Stene, and you also can't kill like Sylvan with the APOC, but Sylvan can reach Stene, and Sylvan can usually out tank or like is able to tempo it out against the Apocalypse Ravi. However, I don't think I've seen anyone draft APOC and Stene together in like a year, maybe even longer. And
Not
nowadays
much
it
north
just
of
feels
champs,
like,
yeah.
yeah, and the other thing that I think really hurts her that I didn't mention yet is, oh my god, Architect Leica can just one-shot her. That I think is so disgusting. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but like,
Well, if somebody lets Architect Leica through in your draft, then they get what's coming to them.
yeah, like again, it's not that it's not that both of them are like fifth pick characters, so you handshake it, like you ban it out. But like I used to, sometimes you could argue, oh well, on my fifth pick, maybe I'm not banning Architect Leica if I've got Aiden and Riolet or something, or if I've got a really tanky unit or something to that degree. But like sometimes, like if you just die to a fifth pick, it kind of feels bad to ban it, because like again, when you pick Solitaria into Riolet, you're like, that's it, that's the ban. Like you pick like someone picks Stene without like your permission, or like without Bellion being pre-banned, like the Bellion's being pre-banned like 100 out of 100 times, right? I don't know what that is for Sylvan. Like I don't know what the character you would pick. It's like, oh well, thank God they picked this. Now I have my pocket pick Sylvan Sage to end it. And again, like it is, as you say, Tristan, she's kind of like a C tier character because of that. I don't really know where else to put her.
It's where she belongs, unfortunately.
Yeah.
She needs an additional survival mechanic. She's got the damage mitigation, but it's just not enough. Maybe she needs what Landy's got, where she can't be stunned or controlled. I don't know. Something like that would bring her back into the meta, maybe. But never thought I'd say let's buff Sylvan Sage Vivian, but she's just a little tricky to use.
Yeah, I think
CR push on hit something. Now, chat did have a good point. Is that one benefit to Riolet and Sylvian? Their biggest detractor is gear right now, and the Ancient Inheritance gear. It's like Smilegate was accidentally brilliant and said, "Hey, we're releasing these units, and all of them are easy to build except these two. So the gear that's an Ancient Inheritance is exactly what they need."
True. Good
But
point.
you're relying on luck and Ancient Inheritance to get you the gear that gets the exact right gear combo. I wouldn't go to the bank with that.
Yeah, it does help though, and so you're right. I think at that, like this is kind of, let me okay, so now that we're towards like
the number one unit you pick is the unit that you want. Okay, want outpaces need all the time. If the game's not fun, why are you playing the game? You pick the unit that's fun.
Exactly.
But so we're building this tier list specifically centered around what's meta and what's the best to advance your gameplay.
So if we like look at this like in totality at the end of the day, Tristan, is there anything you would want to like move around or give a caveat to, like any footnotes, any like additional comments on like certain characters, like before like we wrap up the tier list?
No, exactly how I would have laid it out. I don't know. One could argue swapping DDR and Elena, but I'm sorry, DDR and Sylvian, but it's kind of nickel and diming. Nobody picks either of those units unless they have the other 5 units.
I mean, yeah, I agree. Like at the end of the day, like you said, once, and what will keep you playing the game is what you should ultimately pick. That's something that is abundantly clear now in EpicSeven, because by the time that a character is like meta or like good, there's going to be another character that power creeps them, or like makes the most like the strongest character prior to this, irrelevant. It doesn't really make any sense to play off of like, not that it doesn't make sense to play off of meta, but if you're going to like be upset the whole time while you picked, you know, DDR over Riolet, you should just, you know, you should pick Riolet regardless of where he is on the tier list. Again, we made our little caveats, like keep in mind that like with the tier list, and like Tristan mentioned as well, how well some of these characters do will depend on your imprint and your, you know, like your gameplay and like the characters you have alongside them. Ultimately, hate to say it, but even with Remnant Riolet, Astromancer Elena, Pavel, Sylvan, DDR, pretty much everyone outside of the S tier, if you don't have supportive, like you don't have like a proper supportive cast to support these characters, they all suck. Like honestly, if you're gonna, the A and below are not first pickable, and they're also not pickable without any game plan in mind. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing who's who. Are there any final like shout outs or any, you know, anything final you want to say, Tristan, as we end the video?
No, it's really simple. As a guide, you start at the top and work left, right, top to bottom, and the first unit that you hit that you don't have, that's your selection. Somebody says, which unit on this list do I pick? You show them this list and you say, start at the top, left, right, top to bottom. First one you don't have, you get it. There's no unit on this list that's worth having 2 of over not having one of the other units. And the only caveat to that is you skip Riolet and you skip Sylvian if you don't have good gear. Although I kind of would argue that I'd put Pavel above Astromancer. They're both so similar as to almost be overlapping.
All right. Thanks again so much, Tristan. Appreciate it. It was literally just under an hour for the tier list, which is great. Terrific. Thank you.
Yep.
But yeah, that's going to be it for this video, guys. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed, as always, make sure to like, comment. Let me know what you think about the tier list and the Moonlight's Blessing, Fallen, Land, Choosing. That's such a long name. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. See you on the next one. Adios.